Noodler's Inc. is an American-based company dedicated to bringing consumers luxury writing products at a reasonable price. I'm using Noodler's Bulletproof line of inks and their non-waterproof inks with the various tools and materials shown here. You can click the annotations to skip ahead to the parts you're interested in, or stick along for the whole ride. Either way, I hope you learned something in this video. This first tool is a dip pen. I'm using the Hunt number 102 or the quill nib, which is often used by comic inkers for the line variation possible with its extreme flexibility. This can be compared to Noodler's Flex line of fountain pens, which have a similar tip and can be a great substitute when you don't want to deal with the mess of open ink bottles. If you've had experience using a quill, you might already be familiar with this next part. Shellac and acrylic pigment-based inks, though they make nice dark lines, are notorious for clogging the delicate feed on the nib. Sometimes this can even happen in the space of inking a single panel. I'm pleased to say that this is not a problem with Noodler's thanks to the great fluidity and the unique cellulose bonding properties of the Bulletproof line of inks. The Bulletproof line of inks includes the Heart of Darkness ink, which I'm using throughout this entire video. The inks are special because they resist some of the most advanced forgers tools, such as industrial solvents, bleaching agents, UV radiation, and other check scrubbing techniques. The ink reacts with and bonds permanently to the cellulose in the paper, meaning that until your paper actually disintegrates, your mark will still be there. Since your quill nib is metal, this means that cleanup is very easy and it's difficult to permanently ruin a nib with dried Noodler's ink. The properties of Noodler's inks are well suited for use with brushes. I particularly love using these inks in water brushes, which are synthetic fiber brushes whose handles you can fill with just about anything. There are a number of brush pens and brush markers on the market, but the majority of these products have a flexible felt tip rather than actual bristles, and sadly few of them are refillable. I greatly prefer the line quality you can get from a water brush over a brush marker or pen, and I love that Noodler's is able to flow so nicely through them. Actually, it's the first ink I've found which can flow through my water brush without being diluted and without eventually clogging the fibers or the feed in the water brush. Since the line work in this piece was painted with the Bulletproof Heart of Darkness ink, I will be able to make ink washes over top of it with no bleed or contamination. This ink I'm using right now is called Black Swan and Australian Roses. It's a non-waterproof ink from the Noodler's Vintage Shading line. It's incredibly easy to make beautiful washes and gradients with this one. I'm able to layer several coats of the shading ink to make certain areas almost completely black, like the inside of the mouth of the catfish. I am also able to gently glaze in very light washes which fade smoothly to white. Since this is a non-waterproof ink, it's even workable after it is dried on the paper, similar to how watercolors work. I use this property to soften edges that are too harsh or to smooth out gradients. I love using the Black Swan shading ink in calligraphy. I have a fairly inexpensive calligraphy pen, and originally I was using the brand name disposable cartridges with it. The average cartridge only contains about 1 milliliter of ink, and my pen's cartridges came in small packs of 5. That said, I quickly learned to invest in a pen converter, which is like a syringe that enables you to refill your pen with bottled ink. This is both a lot of fun and infinitely more economical than using the disposable cartridges. I started to experiment with different brands and colors, and as soon as I used Noodler's ink, I immediately stopped searching. The smooth ink flow made my cheap pen write so much better, and the selection of Noodler's colors is great compared to the standard blue, red, and black. The gradient with Noodler's ink is just gorgeous, and I was able to get much sharper corners on my letters and much thinner lines for flourishes and accents. Furthermore, Noodler's seems to have some of the biggest bottles on the market. Their 3-ounce bottles are 20 to 200% larger than the majority of the name brand bottled inks out there, and they also carry certain inks in 4.5-ounce bottles. If you do the math, 3 fluid ounces is just under 90 milliliters, which means that I can refill my calligraphy pen almost 90 times from the smaller bottle, and over 130 times from the larger bottle. This is the Noodler's fountain pen that came free with my bottle of Heart of Darkness ink. The components of this pen are exactly the same as the Platinum Preppy fountain pen, but there is one very cool difference. This pen has been altered to be used as an eyedropper, meaning that it requires no cartridge and no converter. Since the entire barrel of the pen can be filled with ink, it holds way more than the standard 1 milliliter that limits most fountain pens. The rubber O-ring seal is very tight, and I've never had any leakage even though I carry the pen with me all day long for writing and drawing. The tip on this pen can be compared to artists' fine liner pens. Fine liners are tipped with compressed felt and come in a variety of widths, but they are rarely refillable, don't hold nearly as much ink, and the felt tip is prone to damage. I've found that it's very easy to make a variety of line widths as well as smooth, tapered strokes with this fountain pen. The archival properties of this ink are also much better than even the top name brand fine liners. If you have ever inked a pencil sketch with a leading fine liner brand and then tried to erase the pencil underneath, you know exactly how bad it can be. Since my pen is filled with the Bulletproof ink, which is invulnerable even to acetone and rubbing alcohol, I don't ever have to worry about the darkness of my line work. And since the pen has a gigantic reservoir of ink, I can even show off and shade large areas of my drawing without worrying about my pen running empty halfway through. Noodler's ink is also great for stamping and stamp making. If you're familiar with the high-density rubber used to create custom stamps and block prints, you probably know how annoying custom lettering can be. You have to carve it backwards, and the soft stamp material simply does not cooperate with graphite transfers. But when you use Noodler's ink on a piece of tracing or drafting paper, you can easily make a wet transfer by oversaturating the ink on the lettering. Luckily, Noodler's inks resist bleeding more than other inks, and so it maintains crisp edges during this process. Just like a temporary tattoo, if you place the paper face down and thoroughly saturate it with water, you'll be rewarded with a semi-permanent backwards transfer right on your rubber block. This makes it easy to cut and trim with your tools of choice and make a very nice stamp. The transfer process is also possible with Bulletproof ink, and you will be rewarded with a darker transfer. The reason it works, despite the archival and permanent properties of the Bulletproof ink, is because when you heavily oversaturate your art or lettering, there actually isn't enough paper for the ink to bond with, so the top layer of ink will transfer over to the stamp. Also, Noodler's does work very well with stamp pads, but lacking one of those, I'm simply brushing the ink directly onto the stamp. If you liked any of the techniques or you learned something new today, please share this video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them down below, and thank you so much for watching.